I I don't think we I don't think we have learned enough yet. I think we have a lot more in that learning curve to do to understand what is happening, because we know the world is getting smaller, if nothing else, because of environmental issues, because of the issues of water and so forth. That if we don't take care of them, they're going to destroy us. Uh, Chief Oren Lyons has given that warning in his messages across the world, speaking of that. And so we need to listen a lot more acutely. And I think that's one thing that young people are picking up on, that some of the older generation simply weren't aware of. And so some of it is educating and learning. I mentioned the issue of tribal colleges and universities. You know, we started out with those back, well, you can date it from 1968 forward as far as the so-called new era of time. But I remember the time when we were first talking about these things conceptually, and they didn't, for the most part, didn't exist. The concept was there. But a lot of the non-Indians, even our friends, allies, if you will, whether they were in Congress or whether they were academics from different universities or colleges, I think oftentimes failed to understand who and what we were about. And in the beginning, there was the usual talk of, well, you can't do that. And they would use the words, this is not possible. You can get an education if you go down the street or 100 miles or 1,000 miles away, and you can get an education. You don't have to be like the rest of the, quote, Indians or indigenous people. You can be successful. You don't need to have these colleges and universities. And we said no, because tribal colleges and universities are at the heart of who we're about. Whether we teach a philosophy or whether we teach a mathematics course, that's all about who we are. And we're simply giving a better definition of who and what we're about. But they said, no, you can't do that because you don't have the trained specialists, you don't have the technologists, you don't have the scientists. And they were talking all in terms of the so-called Western philosophy of what education is all about. And what was left out oftentimes was the fact of who we were as indigenous people, as cultural people, as people who are practitioners of our belief systems, whether it's through religion or otherwise. And we said, no, we want to do these things ourselves, first of all, because it's our own determination. You can call it self-determination, or you can call it sovereignty later on. But if we don't express that ourselves and we don't do it ourselves, then we are not ourselves. And so we're part of that bigger and broader definition of life. And so we're going to do this. And it took some years, but we got federal legislation, which was enabled in 1978 as the first tribal college and university legislation. But we still have to work on that all the time, that we're not misinterpreted or we're not misconstrued. And so I just mentioned that one of the things, I think, things like Harvard and the Honoring Nations programs and the Native Nations Institute will really need to concentrate on is helping us further define these things that I talked about and creating our own institutions and our own way of doing these things. Some of them are through the non-Indian perspective, but they're also the perspective of who we are and what we do. And so if we don't do that, then we would be failing. And for the young generation, they have a better base to build upon. Even the Standing Rock debacle is something that we can build on. And I'm leaving it to them to do that building.